All right. Hey, everybody. Purim Sameach. We are so fortunate to have over here Sheri Manning and over here Matthew Kelly joining with our Purim celebration. This is not a Purim spiel. This is not Purim Torah. It's probably going to be kind of a cerebral Purim celebration, and we'll do a lot more shtick next time. On the other hand, I do see that David Nelson is in the room, so I do think there was going to be some jokes and puns. David, I assume you have a few ready for us. We do want to share with you what the book of Esther is, where it came from, what Purim is, where it came from, and how it devolved into kind of debauchery that we see today across the synagogue world, except Oratora, obviously, where we have more of an interest in the digressions of the mind, correct? All right, Sheri, I know you gave a wonderful talk about Purim at our recent congregational gathering.
I did.
Would you like to share a little bit as an introduction for tonight?
Sure, I can start us out with that.
Okay.
My emphasis at that meeting was this idea of an Esther moment and what an Esther moment is. Before I talk about that, and before I even realized that there was such a thing as an Esther moment, we know that there are Nachshon moments. When we were at the bank of the Red Sea and we were afraid to go forward, there was no going back, and so the Midrash tells us that there was one person that actually stepped into the sea and made the sea part, and without him stepping in, the sea would not have parted, and that is Nachshon. And we in the congregation have called it Nachshon moments, those do or die moments where you have to say, I'd almost rather die than go back to how things were. And it takes courage, takes a certain type of will, and takes a leap of faith. Then, reading the book of Esther, we come across Esther, and the apex of the story, which is chapter 4, I'm not sure of the verse, chapter 4:12 to 4:14. Okay. That's her do or die moment. And then, as Rabbi Finley pointed out to me, I should probably call these moments Esther moments instead of Nachshon moments, because after all, the book of Esther is in our Tanakh, right. And the Midrash describing this this playful story about Nachshon is not in our Tanakh, so correct. That should get...
Nachshon is Midrash.
Exactly, Nachshon is Midrash. So what do I mean by an Esther moment? Very similar to the Nachshon moment, and that is you get to a point and you cannot go forward with how things were. You don't want to go back. And it's a do or die moment. You have to do a leap of faith, summon your courage, and do whatever it takes. And it's actually Mordecai who defines the moment for her, and then she reluctantly acquiesces.
So
and
just for those of us, our listeners who don't know much about Purim, could you just lead us up to the Esther moment?
Okay. So the main characters in our story are Esther, who has come to marry King Ahasuerus. There was a little episode beforehand between the king and his present wife at the time, Queen Vashti, and he's having this 6-month-long party, and at the end of that 6-month period, he wants to summon his beautiful Queen Vashti and show her off to everyone. And he summons her, and she refuses to come. So this angers him. It's a public humiliation. And one of his advisors says to him, advisors who's called Menuchan, but our sages tell us that he's the same person as Haman. Right. Say to him, you've got to do something about this, and what we think you should do is make a decree saying all women in all the lands, and this is 127 provinces, this is a huge Persian empire, all women in all the lands have to obey their husbands, otherwise there's going to be...
You mind if I cite the text?
Sure.
Okay, so Ahasuerus has asked his wife to come. So here's the background that the rabbis like to give, and that was Vashti was actually descended from royalty. This is in the Midrash. She was the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and therefore she was wealthy and esteemed in her own right. But Ahasuerus was a commoner who became emperor by conquering.
A stable boy.
Yeah, a
the Midrash teaches
stable
us.
boy. A stable boy who conquered the provinces. And therefore, there was something in Ahasuerus that envied the fact that Vashti was real royalty, and he was royalty by being a warrior, by being a conqueror. So when we're also told that he summons her when he is drunk, as far as I recall. And in this drunken state, there's a desire to humiliate her, right? Which the sages say actually came from something coming out of him. I'll add psychological to what the sages say.
Him feeling less than.
Yeah, in Vino Veritas, all of a sudden, in wine comes out the truth. So we often talk that we have many different levels of consciousness. They're all functioning at the same time. One level of consciousness takes over. Sometimes when you drink or do drugs or something else under some kind of pressure, sometimes what I call the basement or the dungeon level of truth comes out. And what comes out is his hatred and envy for Vashti. According to this, this is the Malbim. Vashti picks up on this. And she says, this is not about showing me off. This is about humiliating me because I'm royalty. And since I'm royalty and you're not doing this to me. And that is the cause of the refusal. And then, as you're saying, his advisor Memucan gets a hold of this. This is at the end of chapter 1, and he says there's been this big public humiliation. Now, according to some, Ahasuerus sleeps it off, and he realizes he's done a terrible thing. He's caused all this problems all his own. Memucan says, you have to send out this edict. And of course, this is one thing that I've often said. If you look at the actual edict that he sends out, now this will alarm you, so everybody be ready for what I'm going to say next. All wives will show respect to their husbands, great and small alike. Okay, has anybody fainted yet from this? Okay. Then it says, the proposal was favorable in the eyes of king and his officials. And he sent a letter to all the provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, that every man should rule his home and speak the language of his people. So you get to boss your wives around and speak your native language. This was the extent. So some say Ahasuerus really wanted to walk this back. He really didn't like what he had done. On the other hand, Vashti couldn't come back either. Okay, which leads us to the beauty contest where Esther finds herself in the so-called Esther moment. So,
right. So we don't know what happened to Vashti. Some of the Midrash say that she was sent away, she was exiled. Others say that she was killed. But there was no more queen, there was no more wife, and as a result, there was a search that went all throughout the land to find another person to be his queen, and it became a beauty contest. There were women rounded up, and then they had to spend a certain amount of time, a long time, getting beautified in the harem, and then they would each be presented to King Ahasuerus, and eventually he decided that Esther was the most beautiful, she was the one for him, and so he selected her.
Okay. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, we have the incident with Mordecai and Haman, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, Matthew, have any questions to this point about what we're... I mean, are you smelling any rats here? I guess because Matthew runs a security company. He's always looking for rats. So, by the way, Matthew has a fantastic true crime podcast out. Matthew, you want to say a quick word about your podcast? Because it's amazing. Go ahead.
Oh, you're springing this on me. It's called The Looking Glass. It's a true crime podcast about a murder from 1970. It's kind of a murder mystery, but the search for the truth takes a number of sort of...
And Matthew, I'm going to have you look at your...
okay. It takes a number of detours into human psychology and the nature of historical research and
So which famous case is it?
It's the Jeffrey MacDonald case, which is many people regard as solved, and I think there are still important questions that have not been addressed adequately. But anyway, if you're interested in it, it's available everywhere.
So it's a famous, I mean, I remember it very well. And when I heard you were doing it, I wasn't that solved? And you said, and we had many talks about it.
Yeah.
And you put doubt into my mind. And then I listened to your podcast. It is really an amazing podcast. So what's it? The Looking Glass?
The Looking Glass, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It takes us into so many areas. You go through the Manson murders too.
Yeah, it gets into the 1960s.
Yeah, the 1960s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, Matthew, in researching this, you're smelling rats. You're saying that things aren't as exactly as they seem. Just wanted to not that you have noticed something so far. Anything so far raise your attention about what we're talking about here?
Well, you began by asking if I had any questions about what you had already covered, and I want to make sure I understand the point that you're making about him coming to his senses on awakening, and then sending out this edict to the entire all the different provinces in the kingdom. What is how he's somehow covering, right, for his error, but I'm not sure I understand what is the nature of that.
Yeah, so he's done something, in my mind, and some commentators, utterly thoughtless and taken to a psychological level, exposing his own demons, that he's envious of his queen, that she's from royal heritage.
Right.
And this is something that we see oftentimes.
Yeah.
That there's, people have proper relationships. They go to a deep, unseen, kind of a place of shame and horror inside of them. That produces profound envy, the desire to annihilate, the desire to destroy. And how does he destroy Vashti? Is parade her around that she's queen because she's beautiful, and actually she's queen because she's a descendant of royalty.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So Memucan, who's something of a he's trying to rile things up.
Right.
He says, well, you got to take action here.
Right.
Because everybody's going to look at this,
Right.
and everybody's going to say that the king has been humiliated.
Right.
So this is something that we actually talked about, is the everybody. So everybody's going to think this, and everybody's going to think that. One of my rules of thumb is anytime someone says everybody knows, I know they're lying. Okay?
Yeah.
So when someone says everybody's going to think this, now I'm projecting Achashverosh. Ahasuerus says, actually, everybody's not going to think that. I actually made a mistake. So I will write an edict that will be the most meaningless edict that any king of Persia has ever written. Okay?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it was news in Persia that it's a patriarchy.
Yeah.
That was not brand new to anybody.
Right, sure, yeah.
So wives should obey their husbands, and get this, you can speak your native language.
Okay.
We don't know what's going on before that.
Yeah.
But they're all speaking their native languages.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Okay.
So it was an attempt to be tough on crime.
I see.
And there was no crime.
Okay.
Except for him.
Okay.
That's the point that I'm making is many people think of Ahasuerus as a dullard. I'm seeing him as pretty politically sophisticated.
Okay.
You got to sound tough on crime.
So this is just, the typical political move that you would see today. Just get something else into the news cycle.
Yeah,
Okay.
you got to put something out there. It's like you're tough on crime, tough on this, tough on that, and you start to look exactly what they're saying, and there's nothing new. It's the same old thing, but boy, did they sound tough when they said it.
Sure, yeah.
So there's a part of this which I think is something of a satire on royalty, on emperors, on leadership.
I see.
How to say something and not say anything.
Right, okay.
So, however, he did have to get a new queen.
Right.
So since his fantasy about Vashti was a beauty queen, why not get a beauty queen?
Sure.
So they go through the big contest that Sheri was talking about.
Yep.
We're going to skip the intrigue at the end of chapter 2, maybe come back to it. Okay. And Haman, the son of Hammedatha, this is in chapter 3, the Agagite, elevated him to his grand vizier. Now the question is, who was Agag?
Very good question.
All right, do you have an answer for it?
I do have an answer for that.
Okay.
Agag was the king that Shaul was supposed to kill, and he didn't, and that's why he lost the kingship.
Yeah, he was an Amalekite, our
He was
sworn
an Amalekite.
nemesis enemies, and we finally got to the last guy. Saul had him in the crosshairs of his sword.
If he had done what he was ordered to do, we wouldn't even have the book of Esther.
We wouldn't have the book of Esther because there'd be no Amalekites.
Right.
So what did King Saul do?
King Saul killed everyone, but let King Agag live for one night. At least that's the Midrash.
Yeah.
Let him live for one night, and what happened during that one night? Apparently he found some honey to have sex with, and she got pregnant, and from that sprang all the Amalekites, including all the evil people that
All
we think
the
of
evil
now.
people.
In fact, that reminds me, do we have Putintashen or...
Putin, I know. I cannot believe this is happening. I cannot get my head around this. Yeah, so that's good. We're having Putintashen, I think,
Okay.
a little bit later on. The way that I heard the story was King Saul gave King Agag a professional courtesy.
Oh,
Okay, and from
a
that
conjugal visit.
conjugal visit, and from that conjugal visit, mass mayhem comes into the world. So now the book of Esther is hinting, because they don't say he's an Amalekite. They say he's an Agagite, which is close enough. So now we know
Definitely.
Haman is an Amalekite. What about Mordecai?
Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin.
Uh-huh.
Now, why is that interesting? Because King Shaul was from the tribe of Benjamin.
Are you saying to me, let me just get this straight.
People are going to think we set this up with each other.
Are you saying to me that this is actually a resolution of the King Saul
I am.
and King Agag story is right here in the book of Esther?
My favorite, the whole
That is
intertextual
the whole
implications.
intertextuality. Is it can we say intersectionality of the
I don't know. Is
Okay,
that politically correct?
We'll stay with intertextuality. All right. So
But let me backtrack.
Please do.
If you don't mind. Because
Not
you
a
said
bit.
you were going to skip over something that I think is important and appropriate for what we're talking about. And
let's
that's-
not skip it over.
Okay, so that's the stuff that's right at the end of chapter 2. What happens at the end of chapter 2 is after Esther has been summoned to the palace and she's going through this whole beauty regimen for however many days, Mordecai, her uncle / cousin, maybe husband, goes by the...
Whoa. I haven't heard that before.
You haven't?
That Mordecai and Esther were married?
Yeah, there's a midrash that they were actually married.
Okay, so we're going to actually cross that midrash out.
Or we're going to cross that midrash.
In. Matthew, what do you think? Cousin, uncle, or married? You have a
I am not competent to say. This is the first time hearing of this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that took me by surprise.
Really?
So I'm not able to integrate that concept that he was married to Esther and lent her out to the king. But okay, it happens.
We've got
Go ahead.
proof texts for why that happens all over Torah, though,
Yeah,
with Abraham and
The
Sarah.
the first Hebrew, Abraham. You're right. That's the archetype of take my wife.
the Henny Youngman archetype.
Take my wife, for example.
Anyway,
Okay.
we can come back to that.
All
What
right.
I wanted to say was, as a result of her being taken into the palace and for this whole beauty regimen, he would go by the palace, the courtyard of the palace every day to see what was going on with her, find out her fate, and as a result, he overheard a couple people plotting to assassinate Ahasuerus.
Mm-hmm.
And he told Esther about this, and then she told
Well, let's get their names. These two guys.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
It says right here, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Actually, big fan and Teresh.
Right.
So I read this when I was a kid as Big Tan. So I just thought of a big surfer. And I don't have a drosh on Teresh. Does any phonology come to mind? All right. So they have a plot.
They have a plot to assassinate the king, and Mordecai gets word of this to Esther. Esther gets word of this to the powers that be. They investigate. They find out, yes, it's true, and they execute those two guys. And this whole story is written down in the big book of Ahasuerus. Okay. So that's a little aside. But what's important to this, and this was the other thing I wanted to ask you about because I didn't come across this in any of my commentaries, so maybe it's original with me. Maybe not. At the beginning of chapter 3, we read, after these things. Mm-hmm. And after these things, if we look immediately before, the things are this assassination plot and Mordecai letting Esther know. But what happens after these things? Nothing to do with Mordecai and Esther. What happens after these things is Haman gets promoted. So I've been wondering if Haman somehow didn't turn this whole episode around and take credit for revealing the assassination plot. I think that makes sense.
I think it makes complete sense.
The other reason why it makes sense is because we know we learn from this this one verse of Mordecai telling Esther, and Esther then telling the powers that be, that we're always supposed to give credit to people who we've learned things from and who have taught us.
Well, I'm giving credit to you.
So all over the Talmud, for example, you'll read so-and-so in the name of so-and-so, meaning nobody wants to be a plagiar. Everyone wants to give credit where credit is due. So I think that the lesson here is not only should Mordecai be given credit, but look how this horrible person, Haman, took credit away from the appropriate person, got credit for himself, and then was elevated and promoted in position.
Okay. I think there's another reason
Okay.
we have this little anecdote here, and this is for guys like me. Okay? So I'm watching this movie, and I'm saying, when is someone going to get killed? Okay? Because if someone doesn't get killed...
Because you're a guy.
Because I'm a guy. I mean, like, someone's got to get killed here if I'm going to stay tuned into this show. And I want it early so I'll know that there's bloody stuff coming. So they said, there are guys that just need someone in the gallows quick. And I said, okay, good. So now I'll stick. I won't change the channel. That's my theory. Okay, what do you think?
So are we going to talk about who gets killed?
Later.
Okay.
Yeah. But we got to have someone now
Okay.
to keep people interested.
Other than Rosencrantz and Guildenstern?
Okay.
By the way, there's Shakespeare all over. Speaking of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were the two people that were caught plotting and were executed in Hamlet, Shakespeare, I think, must have either was living during this time and there's a whole wrong biography about him, or I don't know what was going on. But for those of you who know The Taming of the Shrew, we see the beginning part of the Esther story with Vashti refusing to come out, very similar to Bianca in The Taming of the Shrew, when Petruchio calls her to come out, wants to show her off. And we see Haman as a very Iago-like character, and Iago's wife, very similar to Teresh, right?
Right.
So there's a whole lot of inspiration that Shakespeare got.
Yeah,
And
I think you're right. When I think about it, that's a wonderful insight. All right. By the way, I just want to digress, if I can, then come back. When we think how we celebrate Purim in the Book of Esther, there's no connection. Right? Nothing in the Book of Esther leads to what we have today. So a very famous book by Theodore Gaster, History of Jewish Festivals, he's trying to figure out how this holiday of absurdity and masquerade and caricature came about. And he said it's from the customs of the 12th night of Christmas, which of course is a Shakespearean play. I haven't read it. Have you read it? Have you ever read the 12th night of Christmas?
I've seen it.
You've seen it, and is it a venture into the absurd? Is there something there?
Yes. There's mistaken identity and play within play and a lot of other devices that Shakespeare likes.
So the scholars have no idea, where this book comes from, completely befuddled. And the next thing is they have no idea where this Purim thing came from. They happen to be juxtaposed, but they're both great mysteries. And since you mentioned 12th night and the marriage and the taming of the shrew, and I think there's something like that in the 12th night as well. Is that correct?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Anyway, so just want to throw that out there. If you want to know where Purim came from, one theory is that it was a 12th night kind of revelry and party, in addition to many, many other things going on. Okay, back to our story. Matthew, any questions, thoughts so far?
I'm interested in where we're heading, so all my thoughts are going to take us afield, so I'm going to keep going.
Okay, go ahead. Where are we heading, Sheri?
We're heading to problem with Mordecai and Haman. And the problem is that Mordecai is outside the palace and wanting to know what's going on with Esther, and every day Haman goes by him, and everyone else bows to Haman because there is an edict that people have to bow to Haman.
It says, all the king's servants at the king's gate would bow down and prostrate.
So not only bow, but
actually
get down.
prostrate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Mordecai didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And you're named Mordecai.
All right. Yeah.
And I know you don't like this, but I did a little research on your name, and it shares a root with the word mered in Hebrew, which is a rebel. So definitely Mordecai is a rebel here. Everybody bows down and he won't. So Haman doesn't like this, and it makes him angrier and angrier and angrier, and kind of like the public humiliation and the anger that was experienced by Ahasuerus. Yeah. And he goes to Ahasuerus, and he says, there's a certain group of people, he doesn't name the Jews by name, there's a certain group of people, they're different, they don't look like us, they don't act like us, they keep to themselves. And we see all the seeds of anti-Semitism here and all the arguments that people have made for centuries why they hate the Jews. And I just think that they're, we don't know if they've got dual loyalties, but whatever they're interested in, it goes against the interests of you, Ahasuerus, and also of the Persian Empire. And I think that we should kill all of the Jews because what they do is something that's against your interests. So just like with Vashti and the king getting angry, Haman gets angry, and instead of making it something personal and keeping it on the personal level, he extrapolates it and makes it into something so global that it ends up being something that could be a decree to exterminate all the Jews. So
I agree. So the question is, under the law that was issued, why couldn't Haman just execute Mordecai? Just have him arrested? I have an answer, by the way.
Okay. I can take a stab
Go
at
ahead.
it. Well, I think he didn't want to make it something personal, because then he would have to say, I'm being petty, and by making it something more important than just his own pride, and by drawing in with the king that it was something that it was an affront to the king and the kingdom, then he could take it out of the realm of a personal affront and make it something that didn't come down to his petty reaction.
Right. Want to hear my theory?
Okay.
That I got from the Malbim,
Okay.
not original with me. That it says all the king's servants at the king's gate would bow down. Mordecai was technically not a king's servant.
Right.
Mordecai was technically, here's what it says here. They came out and they said, why do you disobey the king's command? And day after day they said it to him. And Mordecai did not heed them. And in the end, after he says, look, I'm a Jew. Okay, what does that mean? I'm one of the exiles. I'm not one of the king's servants. Right? I'm a guest of the king. So you can imagine Haman furious that Mordecai does not bow down out of a technicality. So everybody says, look, just go along, get along. Don't anger this guy. Mordecai says, you know what? This is the merit, I don't have to.
The rebel.
Yeah, the rebel. I don't have to. And so there's something, now this is a kind of an Esther Nachshon moment.
I was going to say, right. Yeah, because that's what it reminds me of. Is the Nachshon moment earlier you mentioned, you to step into the sea in order for it to part, right? And so you put my mind on this idea earlier about the presence or absence of God as a character in the text, right? God does not appear as a character who speaks in the text. And in that case, and in this case, the Mered moment, right, where he refuses to bow down, you have the divine drama being kicked off by a human act of faith and also courage, right? He could bow down, right, and make everything easy for himself and for other people, but he starts trouble, right? This introduces, right, the divinity into the story.
That's
in
really
a way.
beautiful, because all we really had now is acts from drunkenness, trying to cover up, a beauty contest, Haman getting elevated, and that's really nice. This is the first moment where you might say, God is introduced in the heart of Mordecai that says, I'm not bowing down to this man. A, I don't have to, legally. And secondly, it's an affront. This guy's a scoundrel. He's a no-goodnik.
Yeah. And this is it's obviously there's a lot of, religion in the world, and you can often tell in tense moments how religious a person actually is, right? Okay. Because particularly like in our tradition, people excel at dialectic and reasoning and even casuistry, right? And so there's always a way to reason yourself out of a situation like this where what's required is something that requires real, chutzpah. And he's doing the right thing.
Okay, Shakespeare question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who said something like prudence is the better part
Discretion.
of valor, right?
Discretion is the better part of valor.
Yeah. Right, which sounds great until you see who said it, right?
Polonius, right?
Yeah, no, that was he's worse than this guy. I forget which play it's in.
Okay.
So I went, wow, this is great. Discretion is the greater part of valor, And then you read it. He's an absolute coward who always has some kind of casuistic theory about why he's a coward. Yeah. So
which is why we are told to learn from everyone.
Yeah.
Because even the fools have something good to say once in a while.
Especially in Shakespeare, who puts wise sayings in the mouths of fools. But Mordecai is saying, actually, right now, discretion is not the better part of valor. Valor is the better part of valor.
And is that even true? There's a lot of, I know you cited the Malbim, but there's a lot of commentary in Midrash that kind of simplistically say that Mordecai would not bow down, for example, because Haman was wearing robes that had Avodah Zarah, idolatry on it, and other reasons like that. That to me, that's kind of forcing an answer.
Yeah, they want to take the character issue out.
Right, they want to take the character issue out. But to me, discretion is the better part of valor would lead one to think maybe it wasn't the smartest thing for Mordecai not to bow down. Look how he endangered all of the Jewish people. So maybe he should have just bowed down and been a rebel in a way that if there was going to be a danger, the danger would stop with him. So why do you think that he just didn't bow down?
Well, remember, this is a novella. This is not historical. There's an author at work, and the author knows where the story's going. So the author knows that this is the moment that actually begins Haman's downfall. So Mordecai's valor is the better part of valor, ends up with the ruination of Haman. That's part of what makes the story.
So this drives the action.
Yeah. And so y'all know I love military history. And so what do you do after you get triple bypass surgery and you're kind of immobilized? I read another history of the Battle of the Bulge. Okay? And so the American lines are thin and overextended. There's this massive German, 600,000 German soldiers, maybe 200,000, come pouring through the American lines. They're getting beat up, battered, retreating, encircled. And the author who was there said all of a sudden, these guys had a look on their face, that's enough. That's enough. And they dig in their weapons, and they dig in their anti-tank weapons, and they said, we're not getting shoved around anymore. So, it was like this incredible moment. We're not getting shoved around anymore. We're better than these people. So, I read this, and I thought, wow, what kind of person quits running and just turns around and puts their weapon up and says, I don't care how many of you there are. So, of course, I come to this, and, Mordecai says, actually, I'm not bowing down. So I think sometimes history turns on people who said, I'm not going to get shoved around anymore.
Yep. In fact, coincidentally, I just read another one of Malcolm Gladwell's books that I really like him and like his point of view, called David and Goliath, and it's exactly about that.
Wow. I love his books. I love his podcast, everything.
Yeah. So I recommend that, especially the section specifically on David and Goliath.
Okay, I can't wait.
And how a lesser person can defeat a greater enemy. And how you recognize those differences that give you the advantage when everyone looks at an objective situation and says, there's no way.
Yeah. I want to say, because I think very few of us are going to find ourselves at the Battle of the Bulge. But I think everybody has life circumstances that just feel overwhelming. And you start to feel a kind of, an inner emotional collapse. And then you say to yourself, I have the strength to get through this moment, which is the Mordecai moment and, of course, the Esther moment and the Nachshon moment. So these are not just, I think the lesson is not just, obviously not just historical, but it's also an inner life, digging in your heels and saying, I'm greater than whatever this is, I'm greater than that.
Absolutely, which is why, to me, one of the best questions we can ask ourselves in these moments is not, what should I do, but who am I?
Who am I?
And
That's
when you
exactly
figure
right.
out who you are, then it leads you to the path of what you should do. And do you mind if I just go
Please do,
forward
yeah.
to that moment, which I call the Esther moment in
Okay,
the
yeah.
text? And for those of you who have Tanakhs, I'm at 4:13, and I'll just read it. It's just a couple psukim. Then Mordecai said to reply to Esther, and this is, let me just set it up a little bit.
Go ahead, Steph, just a little bit, and I won't interrupt anymore.
No, it's fine. There's been a back and forth between Esther and Mordecai. He finds out that we didn't go over this yet. He finds out that because of his refusal to bow down to Haman, that Haman has gone to the king, and, as I said, and said, there's a certain people and they're different and they're against the kingdom and they act differently and they don't care about what we care about, and you should issue an edict to kill all of them. And the king agrees. So Mordecai finds out about this edict, and he puts on sackcloth and ashes. He's in mourning, and he shows up in sackcloth and ashes outside the courtyard of the castle every day, and Esther gets wind of this and sends him clothes. She's kind of angry. She's feeling a little humiliated. She wants him to act more appropriately. It's reflecting badly on her. And he refuses to change his clothes. He's the merit. He's the rebel once again. And they have an exchange, not face-to-face, but through a messenger, which is really interesting. And the exchange is basically, the king has issued this edict, in case you didn't know, Esther, because she may not know. And you need to do something about it. You're in the perfect position. You've got the ear of the king, and you need to do this now. So that's the setup. So right before this, verse 13, 4:13, verse 12, they related Esther's words to Mordecai, where she says, nobody's allowed to go in to the king unless they're summoned, and he hasn't summoned me for 30 days, and if you go into the king and you're not summoned, chances are he'll kill you.
Yeah, it's a capital crime.
Exactly. So here's Mordecai's response to that. He says to her through this messenger, "Do not imagine in your soul that you will be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of us Jews." And let me just explain this. Up to this point, Esther hasn't disclosed to the king that she's Jewish. So he's saying, don't imagine that you're going to get out of this like any of the rest of us Jews. For if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. And as we spoke about before, your father's house, that's the whole tribe of Benjamin. So there's huge consequences for all the Jews that live in all the 127 provinces. And then he continues on. And who knows, and this is the key question, and who knows whether it was just for such a time as this that you attained the royal position.
Umi yodea im la'et hazot higat l'malchut.
So this is him saying to her, this is your moment. This is the do or die moment. And she recognizes this and actually says, I'll do it, and if I perish, I perish. Kind of like Nachshon saying, I'd rather die than go back to Egypt. But now I'm going to call it the Esther moment rather than the Nachshon moment.
Okay.
So then she immediately formulates a plan. She finds out who she is. She's the person that says, if I perish, I perish. I'm going to do this. And what happens? in this transforming moment, she gets this plan. Go assemble the Jews, fast for me, do not eat or drink. I with my maids will also fast. So she's going to fast for 3 days. Now, if you wanted to go into the king when you weren't summoned, the last thing you would want to do is fast for 3 days and maybe not look your best. So she has this whole plan of what she's going to do. And then, of course, we know that she goes in to the king, and he extends her...
I want you to focus on the very last words of verse 16.
Okay. Thus I will come to the king, though it is unlawful, and if I perish, I perish.
Yeah. I will come to the king, though it is unlawful, and if I perish, I perish.
It's a do or die moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's this. These few verses justify, in many ways, the entire book of Esther. You know, I think they drill down.
They make me cry every time I read them.
Yeah. What it means for a person to arrive at such a moment. And Matthew, any insights, questions so far?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Okay, and let's talk about how things fall apart for Haman.
Can I say one more thing
course,
about the
yeah.
Esther moment?
Yeah, please do.
So that people don't think it has to be as dramatic or profound as moments like these. I've had some Esther moments, and now with the help of reading Tanakh, I recognize them. And I always have the question, who am I, at the back of my head to kind of test myself where I am with a particular issue. But they're not just huge moments, huge turning points in one's life. They can be the little things. Esther moments happen all the time. And this is the way, to me, that makes these verses accessible and these stories accessible. That we don't just think that these are things that happen to kings and queens, that where the fate of a whole group of people is in the balance. No, sometimes it's things that happen in families between siblings, and the fate of whether a family is going to move forward successfully hangs in the balance. And those are the daily issues that most of us face.
Can I share a little something that happened when I was in the military? I think I've mentioned this before. So we had in my barracks when I was over in Okinawa, there was a table, and if you want to get rid of something, you put it on the table, and other people could take and just pick it up. So apparently a guy was unloading, like from his motorcycle or something, and put something on the table, and the guy walked by and said, "Oh, they're giving it away," and took it. So he goes looking for it. They found a guy with it, and he was accused of theft, which is a major thing in a barracks of no thievery. So I was a court reporter. There was a trial, and the guy says, "There's a table, and anything on the table you can take." And the prosecutor just guffawed. "Oh, so you're saying to me, you want this court to believe that there's a place where people put things, and anything you want you can take?" He's not a very articulate guy. He says, "Yes, sir." And the defense had not done their homework. And so there was a break. And I came to the defense attorney and I said, "Sir, I got to tell you something. You didn't do your homework. It's actually true." And the defense said, "It's too late, but I'll get this on appeal." Because he knew that when you go from either prosecutor to defense and you get to the appeals court. And he said, "I'm going to reverse this." But I remember, lowly
Good
Lance...
for you.
Right? Lowly Lance Corporal come to the captain and say, "Sir, you didn't do your homework." Yeah. So, and he just took it. He said, "Thank you, Lance Corporal Finley. I'm going to get this reversed on appeal."
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I'm not saying anything bad would happen to me, but I definitely would not have been on his good list. Not every captain will.
Right.
Yeah.
That's when truth has to be the higher goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you say, pride goeth before the fall.
Yeah. Really, I thought to myself, I don't care what happens to me. I gotta get this out. I can't see that young guy, sent to prison for something that is completely unjust. So.
Yeah, truth is, it's truth. Truth and divinity, I think, are the same thing. I think a person who doesn't have faith in God, and here it's rather clear that she's turning to God, right? I mean, she's not just going forward. She's saying we need to fast. We need to do these things. We need to plead with God to enter this picture causally. And I may die, but nevertheless, I'm going to have the courage to move forward because I believe that I'm living in a world where there actually is a divinity and there actually are things that are right and wrong. That's often what can give you the courage to do it. It's not totally necessary because there are very, very principled, courageous people who don't believe in God, obviously, and for them, it's simply truth, which is admirable. But yeah.
Yeah, so truth is one of the names of God. So this is a true moment. The truth has to be presented. And if one does believe in God, then that is a godly moment. If that one does not believe in God, then it's just a moment of truth and courage.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the rest of the story, we can continue, is the downfall of Haman, but it occurs to me there might be some questions from our studio audience. So, Yosh, if you don't mind putting us in gallery view, we'll see. Let's see the whole gallery, if you don't mind. Ruth Sharon, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
This is wonderful. Nice to see you, Rabbi. Looking so great. So I just had a moment here when the sentence that says, and Mordecai then left and did exactly as Esther had commanded him. Now that's the exact opposite of the edict that the king sent out to everybody in the land. So here you have a reversal in the story of how women's position supersedes men, and that they
Isn't that great?
Great catch.
That's a great catch. Oh my God. That's a great
How many
catch.
Rashi points does she get?
You get you're all the way up to a Rambam point. It's just like you've exhausted the Rashi. It takes 20 Rashi points to get a Ramban point, 20 Rambam points to get a Rambam point, and you just zoomed ahead. I just want to make sure everybody got that.
4:17.
Chapter 4, verse 17. She comes up with a plan, and Mordecai then left and did exactly. Let me look at the Hebrew here. 4:17. Vayas kechol asher tzivta alav. Tzivta alav, ordered him. And so this is exactly a reversal of that meaningless decree. It takes on meaning right here. Mm-hmm. When Esther says, okay, thank you, Mordecai, I'm in charge now. I got this one. That's a wonderful point. Thank you so much, Ruth.
I want to add one more.
Of course.
There's a woman's version of the Bible that Marshall Falk was very involved in helping to create. And the complaint usually is from women is that we are minimized, we're often not named, and that it's basically his story, not her story. But I think it would be possible to assemble a list of from both Esther and from other places, from the daughters of
Zelophehad.
Zelophehad.
and other places too, where it actually does show a huge respect for women, and so that women who are coming to Judaism for the first time wouldn't have to feel, oh yes, this is just another patriarchal religion.
Right. It's a very uninformed point of view. For a text that's supposed to be patriarchal, you go through the book of Genesis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the matriarch there, and the daughters of Zelophehad, so many other points. You know the theory of Harold Bloom, why all this is so? So you know the source criticism, J, E, P, and D, the Judah narrative, the Northern narrative, the priestly narrative, and the Deuteronomic narrative. He claims that Bathsheba, the wife of Solomon, is the author of the J narrative. The J narrative was actually written by a woman and placed into the Chronicles. She's not very good to her husband in this narrative. Anyway, Harold Bloom, he almost makes it almost as an aside on the book of J. But yes, anybody who says that women are minimized, they don't get as much press time, but over and over and over again.
But their impact is huge.
Yeah, their impact is huge and transformative. Thank you for that. All right, does anybody else have any question or comment? Roland, hey.
Thank you. I have a heretical question based on something that I thought I understood Matthew to say about faith and deity. Is it necessary to have deity to have faith?
Well, that's a great question, and I am actually contemplating, starting this Friday night, teaching the first book that any thoughtful person should read when they come to the question of religion, which is Paul Tillish's The Dynamics of Faith. Mm. And just to give a little preview of that, really a 2-minute preview, remember, he's writing after World War II, and he said the great mistake in National Socialism and communism was that they had arrived at the truth. And he said, whatever God is, and he doesn't define it in the first chapters, that whatever you believe in, whatever your politics are, whatever grabs your loyalty, whatever your tribe is, there's something greater. That's it. Just think to yourself who you are as part of a class, race, national, political identity, right? Triangulate yourself until it says there's something beyond that. And then he wants to develop God. It's called the God beyond religion. Even if I say to myself, well, I'm a Jew and I believe in God, well, what's the God beyond that? Because that can become idolatry. So anything less than the God beyond everything, according to Tillich, is idolatry. Mm-hmm. So I've been rereading it, wondering if I should go ahead and teach little chunks of it. And what do you think, Sheri? Should I?
Love it. Ultimate reality.
Yes, ultimate concern, ultimate reality. I think it's a really important book. Many people find it.
It's difficult.
As a difficult book, so I want to break it down. And so if you want to get The Dynamics of Faith by Paul Tillich, written in 1956, it's unparalleled. There's nothing better for a thoughtful person's introduction to religion. So Matthew, have you come across this book in your theological
I know
travels?
Tillich, but no, not that book. I was just going to say, though, that you put your finger on something, I think, critical, which is, you referred to ultimate reality, it's transcendence. And we were saying earlier, to Roland's point, I think that a person can take a leap of faith that is not sort of theologically animated, yeah. Right? There just are such people. There are people that are constituted in such a way morally, for whatever reason, that they will jump out of the ditch and run toward gunfire, mm-hmm. and lay their lives on the line for truth, right. Or for country or whatever. Yeah. But I do think that, to be intellectually fair and honest, there are approaches to reality that are highly reductionist. Yuval Noah Harari came up. Right. Abigail was talking about Yuval Noah Harari several months ago, and I think we talked about his book *Sapiens*. And it's a fascinating book. It's a really good book, and informative, but it's highly reductionist. His worldview is highly reductionist.
Reductionist in the sense that he's against the idea of moral reality. Yeah,
there is no moral reality, and he has reasoned himself, so he thinks, up to the point where he can see that all moral systems are on an equal plane metaphysically, because they're all fictions. They're
all fictions and humanly constructed.
Right, and so I think you may have said this to me, although it stuck with me, and I've said it myself, that worldview, if that's the software you're running on, you do not jump out of the boats and storm the beaches of Normandy, because why would you do that? Mm-hmm. You have two competing, equally silly moral understandings of the world, Nazism and whatever, democratic, idealism or whatever. You're not going to take a bullet to the head for one fiction over another. You have to be animated, and the people who jumped off those boats were animated by some sort of higher orientation. It could be country, but I think for many people it was God.
Yeah, and it was beyond country. I mean, as you read the biographies of the Allied soldiers, it wasn't just for America.
Yeah, right.
It was
right and wrong.
Yeah, it was right and wrong.
Right.
They truly understood that they were fighting evil.
Yeah.
In fact, I've read many autobiographies of German soldiers, of the Germans at Normandy. And one thing they were stunned at, as when British or American soldiers would storm their positions, the hatred on their faces. Mm-hmm. And the Germans would say, look, we're just soldiers. Right. Why are you taking this so personally? They would be filled with hatred for the German soldiers. And Yeah, so there's something very deep there. So no, you don't have to believe in God. In fact, Tillich would say, if you believe in the God of your religion,
That's not God.
that's not God. That's actually going to be, that might
Idol
lead you on-
worship.
yeah, that might be idol worship.
Interesting.
So whatever your religion is, whatever your politics are, whatever, there's something beyond it. And you know who Tillich focuses on is the Hebrew prophets. He says, who are my teachers here? Is the Hebrew prophets. You know, whatever the priests were teaching, they weren't buying it. I mean, whatever Israelite religion was at their time, whatever the priest said, whatever the monarch said, whatever the official deal was, we're not buying it. I mean, whatever God is beyond this. So he's very, very moved by the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. And we can say, well, they believed in God. They didn't believe in the God of the times. Okay? They believed in the God beyond God. And that's how they get into the canon. And we want to regain the as it were, the faith of the prophets. This is, of course, Heschel. Heschel wrote his doctoral dissertation, probably our most well-known 20th century theologian, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And some of his books are just extraordinary, but his doctoral dissertation was the prophets. One of his lines, he says, the prophets are like everybody else with a moral concern. They just speak at an octave higher. Isn't that a great line?
I like that.
Yeah.
Maybe this should reawaken in you what you were talking about recently, teaching us on the book of Jeremiah.
Yeah. It's profoundly moving when you dig yourself into one of these prophets. Maybe at our next gathering, I will go back to teaching Jeremiah. It is such a meaningful thing. So it's not about God of religion. It's about the God beyond God. And therefore, it's about there is moral realism. There really are better and worse answers to moral question. It's not reductionism. All human systems of thought are not equal. And that's a tough thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, especially at the moment.
Yeah, at the moment, it's very tough to say that not all human thought systems are equal. Anyway, that's the ground that we're staking out here. Because Mordecai would say, I'll just get out of Persia. Right? There's no such thing as the Jewish people. There's no such thing as right and wrong. I'll just hightail it out of here and wait till the storm blows over. Yeah. Okay.
Speaking of getting out of Persia, so just back to the story a tiny bit. So Esther goes to see Ahasuerus unbidden, and he extends the scepter to her, which is him acquiescing to her showing up. She doesn't get killed, obviously. And she says she has a request, and Ahasuerus says, even if you were to ask up to half of the kingdom, I will give it to you. So she files that away, and then after this whole episode and the book is over with, she divorces him. She doesn't want to be with him anymore. She moves out to Valley Village, and she meets with a divorce attorney and says, look, my king promised me half. And the divorce attorney, now this was, years ago, the divorce attorney said, half? I've never heard of such a thing. And so she actually underwrote our community property law here in California.
You heard it for the first time.
She's the reason
why
women get half of whatever's accumulated during the marriage.
Okay. That's and he set himself up, didn't he?
Yeah.
He set himself right up for that. And one of the other, if I could just find, that's great. A last thing is, Haman is getting ready to. We just had a talk earlier. Your son Davian, and he asked about something at school, and I said, "Pride goes before the fall." And Davian said, "I don't understand that." So we were at our kitchen table a few minutes ago, and I went into a long explanation of the pride goes before the fall. Look at Haman. Haman builds this, has this great parade.
When Ahasuerus said, what should I do for a man who did this for me and did that for me?
So what happens? Ahasuerus can't sleep. He has a sleepless night. And
Thank God.
Yeah, exactly. He has a sleepless night, and he says, read out the Chronicles. The Chronicles of the Kingdom will for sure put me to sleep. He's not a history buff. So they read out the Chronicles of the King, and he goes, whoa. What did I ever do for that guy Mordecai? They said, you didn't do anything for that guy. He says, so all the stuff that was prepared.
That guy who uncovered that assassination plot.
Exactly right, Mordecai. So Haman says to Haman, what should I do for a man whom I want to honor? Haman goes, yeah,
Finally.
baby, finally getting my moment in the sun, right? So he plans this whole thing, and who gets put on the horse? Mordecai. Yeah. So
And who gets hung on the gallows?
and guess who hung on the gallows? Haman. So this is where it's just a very sweet novella, filled with just
Shakespearean.
enough Shakespearean, just enough violence to keep a guy like me interested in it, intrigue, beauty contest. Michael Ventura with you remember Michael Ventura?
No.
Oh, you remember Michael Ventura? This is way before your time.
I don't think
Matthew.
so, no.
All right, so Michael Ventura wrote for the LA Weekly, and he was a sassy guy who poked at every institution possible. And he finally went over the line when he was a judge at a beauty contest in Hermosa Beach. And they said, okay, that's it, you're fired. Whatever you want to do, you can't be a judge at a beauty contest. So he had to get out of town anyway.
And Trump got the job.
Right. Yeah, so if you look up Michael Ventura, LA Weekly. Remember the LA Weekly?
Yeah, loved LA Weekly.
Yeah, Jill Stewart.
I just read the review of the theaters, the plays.
Oh, Jill Stewart was amazing. God, if you can go back, I don't know what happened to her, but Jill Stewart was a muckraker, and she just raked so much muck everywhere. Oh my God, what a great! Between her and Michael Ventura, the LA Weekly was an actual exciting thing to read.
Like
And
the
then-
Village Voice.
Not that I know enough about that. So they got bought out by a big company, and they fired Jill Stewart and Michael Ventura. Little did they know, they went to some other corporation who bought them out, and they got their jobs back. So anyway, the story of Jill Stewart and oh, by the way, now that we're going back, what year is it? 25 years. So we had one of our first events for the so-called Big Givers, and they said, okay, Rabbi Finley, invite somebody interesting. I invited Jill Stewart.
And she came?
She came to talk to our Big Givers.
Wow.
Wow, what a night that was. Yeah. She had us in the palm of her hand. People didn't know who she was, and I just thought, this person needs to be famous, or more famous than she is. So I think she's an Esther, a Mordecai, meaning a person who said, I don't care, you fire me. But if I find the muck, I'm going to rake it, right?
Yeah.
So your podcast has that flavor to it of people that aren't shutting up, right? Or are you the guy that won't shut up?
I'm definitely not shutting up. Although I splice in the deeper into the season you go, the more it's actors speaking rather than me. So that way you don't get too tired of hearing me carry on. But what do you mean the
official narrative?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I'm kind of piggybacking on Errol Morris, right? Errol Morris.
That's exactly right. That's the guy.
Yeah, he resurrected this case in 2012, and then Mark Smerling, who I guess is friends with Morris and an admirer of Morris, he collaborated with Morris on a documentary series that came out 2 years ago, in which he kind of rebuts. It's quite interesting. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before, where he kind of rebuts Morris's case. And Morris is a part of the rebuttal, like they have this kind of on-screen conversation. But I don't, Anyway, it sounds boastful, but I think we've gotten to the bottom of things where they didn't.
I just want to say it's a fantastic podcast. You all should listen to it. It's 8:07.
Good job, Rabbi.
Unless there are further questions, I think we've used up our allotted time. We've used up another Purim. Matthew, you have a whole set of notes here. Anything
none of it came in handy.
Okay, well, we know where God was.
But we don't know where God wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I playfully said to Matthew, if God wasn't in the book of Esther, what was God doing? And it turns out he's all over. God is all over.
Yeah,
the book of
that's
Esther.
really it kind of surfaced what I would have referred to. It's just that you see God reflected in the eyes of the character. Of the different characters, right? And in that way, I think the moral effect, like you're talking about, where it can make you weep or whatever, it may hit harder because when God appears as a character, there's a strong allegorical quality to the text, so it's sort of once removed from reality. Whereas here, precisely because God's not showing up and issuing commandments, but rather human beings are in dynamic interaction with God or what they take to be God, it feels more like, these types of moments, like Esther moments that you would have in your own life.
That's really powerful. It's a more powerful book
Yeah.
because God is not telling people what to do.
Right. He's implied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some moral reality is implied.
Yes.
And
right.
if you don't want to call it God, you don't have to. But there's some moment implied where a person realizes their life is about more than they thought it was.
Yeah.
And they have to step up,
And they have
Right.
to step up.
Right.
which is a perfect lead into another quote by Shakespeare, which I think really reflects the theme of this book. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have greatness thrust upon them. Yeah. And our heroes in the book of Esther had greatness thrust upon them.
Yeah.
Let that be our last verse for tonight. Some of us have greatness thrust upon them. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful place to end. So thank you, everybody, for joining us in our cerebral forum.
And funny.
There was some humor laced in here. I think we had fun. I hope you guys had fun. And I called Sheri Matthew and said, hey, you guys want to sit around and banter about the book of Matthew? We didn't do any planning. We didn't coordinate anything.
Book of Matthew?
Book of Matthew.
What did you do while
the
you
Gospel of Matthew.
That's next time.
That's next time. Yeah. That's during my Christmas sermon. The Gospel,
during your next.
The Gospel of Matthew. Yeah. Oh, the Gospel of Sheri. How's that? How's that? Actually, the book of Esther and Purim and all the fun and insight we've had. Read that last line again.
Some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have greatness thrust upon them. Okay. I think it's from 12th Night, actually.
Oh, my goodness. We'll look that up. Yeah. All right. The circles are coming together. Chag Purim Sameach, everybody.